Hey everyone, welcome to the Agronomists. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and I feel a little blurry. You know what? Maybe it's just that kind of night. Maybe I am blurry. All right. Welcome here. Thanks for everybody for joining us. Shout out to Kevin over there in the Fraser Valley. I believe you said last week that everyone in the Fraser Valley should have had their field work done by Friday or they'd run out of time. And it looks like it started raining. So congrats. I'm glad. And I do hope you got your field work done. Hello to Ray. Hello to Matthew. Great to have you here. This is going to be a fantastic show. I'm super excited about this one. Okay. Before, of course, we get rolling and I bring my guests in, I do want to remind everyone that you do qualify for various CUU credits for watching tonight. You can head over to realagriculture.com/agronomists tomorrow morning and claim those credits. And of course, so happy to have some show sponsors as well. We have ADAMA Canada, the Pulse School, and Decisive Farming by TELUS Agriculture. Decisive Farming by TELUS Agriculture. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. I'm having so many issues tonight, but that's okay. At Decisive Farming by TELUS Agriculture, we can help. Let's optimize your fertilizer costs and replenish your soil by tailoring nutrient plans to your field's needs. Visit decisivefarming.com to learn how to get soil health insights today. Thank you for sticking with me, everybody. It's a Monday, let me tell you. All right, let's bring in tonight's guest. We are going to talk about variable rate applications for seed and for fertilizer, and this is going to be a good one. So speaking of Decisive Farming by TELUS Agriculture, I have with me tonight Garth Donald and Caleb Niemeyer of Woodrill Limited. Now, Caleb, I keep wanting to say Niemeyer. So
that's right. Not like the hockey player, though.
Not the hockey player. I keep telling myself that. Yeah, I mean, maybe.
Niemeyer.
Yeah, you could tell everyone that you're, his brother or something. Anyway, but welcome here, Caleb. So Garth is joining us from near Calgary, northeast Calgary. Caleb's joining us from Guelph. And so, Garth, it snowed a lot in Alberta.
There was a little bit. Yep.
Yeah.
We got over by Airdrie was 6 to 8 inches. South Calgary, they had over a foot, so which was nice. We didn't have any moisture, so. But east of Calgary,
yes,
the big zero.
Nothing. Bupkis.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Oh, I'm freezing tonight. That's great. Cool. Now, Caleb, you and I'm going to guess that you had similar weather to what I had today, which was
beautiful.
Stunningly gorgeous and basically yeah. So sorry about your luck, everybody out west. Yeah. But also I would think we might have a couple regulars that join a bit late tonight because they're probably busy in the field trying to get the last of the things done or getting into corn because that is what we're doing out this way. Okay, so let's start with a bit of introduction. This is the first episode of The Agronomists for both of you. So Garth, in your day-to-day, what do you do with Decisive Farming?
So I look after 4 agronomists within Decisive Farming, plus territory, just a small one. The Peace area, Red Deer, south the U.S. border, and then west side of Saskatchewan. And basically my day-to-day is looking at soil tests and working with growers to create fertility recommendations. And then when we get closer to spring, seeding recommendations. So we're mainly a variable rate company, so that's what our big part is. We still do regular soil testing, but variable rate is our big focus within our company.
All right, now Caleb, tell us about what you're working on, but also some of the research you've worked on.
Yeah, so I work with Woodrill, and so Woodrill has this precision ag arm of Woodrill that's just we've branded as groundwork. And so that is basically a soil mapping business that we have. And so we'll map out farmers' fields according to those old county soil reports that were made, from at least in Ontario, from the 1950s through about the 80s, where they went through and they mapped all of Ontario soils. So, a Guelph loam, London loam, all these different soil types that we kind of know of and have heard about in Ontario. And so we mapped them on a finer scale than what the county maps did. And so we use those for precision agriculture purposes. And so we use those soil maps for everything from variable rate fertilizer to, variable rate seed as well.
So now everyone knows why I've invited the two of you here because between the two of you, we've got great geographic representation. We've got some fantastic boots on the ground, people living and breathing this stuff. So I couldn't think of a better team to work through some of this. So of course, for those watching at home, get your questions into the comments, and we'll go through as many as we can. But I, of course, have more than a few to get us started. So Garth, I'll start with you. I want to talk about sort of the what we can do and perhaps what we do most of with variable rate technology. So maybe let's start with the overall promise of variable rate, but really right now at least where we're using it most.
So the overall promise is still realistically sustainability. And, I know that's the buzzword of call it the last 5 years about sustainability, but that is where this all came about, was utilizing your fertilizer and placing it where it can be utilized by the plants efficiently. And that's kind of where that's taken us moving forward. And that is where we're just fine tuning it to get even better within the agricultural platform that we work with. So I guess that somewhat answers your question, but yeah, that's pretty basic. But in the same token, I think that's the other side. Everybody thinks that variable rate is so confusing or complicated, and it actually isn't. It's very simple at the end of the day.
So Caleb, what first interests you to really start to get into mapping and precision farming and variable rate?
Yeah, so it's something that I've always been interested in because everybody knows, or at least farmers know that different areas of the field are going to be different, and they're going to respond to nutrients and crop inputs differently, right? Whenever you're looking at the top of a hill, and you maybe have 100 bushel corn there, versus kind of in a valley where you have 250 bushel corn in those valleys, and so it's pretty intuitive that there's got to be some kind of management decisions that are made differently on those two soils, right? That kind of what sparked my interest is kind of seeing those variations. Think, well, it doesn't really make sense to be treating those soils the same, since they're obviously different and they require different amounts of management opportunities.
So that I think it makes perfect sense, of course, right? But how do we take something as logical and you can see it on the yield map, you can probably even see it in the field, and how do we make the magic happen where we have all the equipment and the mapping and the people to run it all? Because I feel like, and we actually just recently did a survey and talked about variable rate adoption, and it still feels like it's not nearly at the adoption part of the curve that we probably thought it would be 20 years ago. So Garth, where is the magic not happening most often? Where does this sort of the process of seeing it in the field, knowing you should maybe manage it differently, but not managing it differently, where does that break down most likely?
It goes back to the family. And grandpa did it this way, dad's done it this way, so I'm going to do it this way. And you may be able to show what you can do. With our multi-year imagery, I can lay it out. I can go anywhere. Guys, give me a legal, I'll throw them a map. I don't even have to say a word. And they'll start pointing of, oh yeah, that was where the straw pile where we bedded cows for 30 years was, or oh yeah, that's the windblown knoll that we don't ever grow anything on, or yeah, that was a slough that we tried to reclaim. They know that, but it becomes of a resistance of, well, it's just really easy. And some of it is fear. And we have to remember there is a large group of fear change. Let's put it that way, that change scares them. And so that's where some of that loss of adoption has been, is that, well, I set it and I can go and I don't have to worry realistically, like what happens to that computer stop? Oh my God, the computer stops. The best part I always throw back to them is, so what do you do when your GPS stops? Well, I stopped the tractor. I can't go anywhere. No one wants to grab the steering wheel anymore. That's kind of the joke we have within our company of, watching farmers sit in the corner of the field because, well, I lost GPS. Well, I guess we might as well go for coffee until it gets fixed. So that's that loss. And we find that the non-sampled acre is actually the largest competitor for variable
Mm.
rate. People don't, in the West, people that still don't sample. I know in the East there's more sampling, but in the West we're still a lot that don't soil test. So that's what causes the issues.
Caleb, do you agree? Do you think that that Ontario is further ahead? Do we soil sample and sample in general more acres? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done much work in Western Canada, so I can't really comment on the differences between the two. But yeah, there definitely is. I definitely agree with Garth 100% for the biggest competitor to be able, or to, you know, as a business, the biggest competitor would be just a uniform rate, right? And so there's all kinds of opportunity to be increasing that because I agree, yeah, 100% that it's kind of the traditional way that it's done. It's an easy way to do things. And so by just kind of encouraging people to look at some of the economics and the data behind it, it can be pretty, yeah, pretty economically friendly, to say nothing about sustainability, to be looking at some of this stuff. And especially, with the cost of fertilizer basically doubling or more than doubling over the past year and a bit, it definitely makes variable rate seem a lot more attractive. And so that's something that I think has been, at least in our geography, has been taking off quite rapidly in the past, I would say, year. And so it's kind of exciting to see that adoption curve kind of picking up a little bit.
Yeah, I would. I mean, any, and I think I'm frozen, which is just great. But any new technology requires some sort of return on investment, right? And for some technologies, that return on investment is immediate. You see it that year. It You can tally up your bills and you can tally up your extra yield and you're good. You're golden. But we don't always see that. And Laird and Mosak makes a great point with the pushback is, well, my fields are perfectly flat, there can't be any variable sampling, then hey, there's no variability. What would I be adjusting for? So, and I also see we're getting spammed on YouTube. So somebody will take care of that, I hope. And Matthew points out computers are intimidating to lots of folks too. And I agree. So let's maybe, before we sort of get into some of the field examples, and we have some pretty cool maps to look at and that sort of thing. Garth, when you're bringing farmers on board to start using prescription maps and variable maps and these sorts of things, how important is that support to bring a new customer up to speed?
Oh, it's huge. We when we first started 16 years ago, the three of us were just young and let's go get it. And we do all this work and bring a grower a map, and he'd look at us and go, "That's a beautiful map. That is my field." Would be the first one because we had no check and balance system. And then once we started that, realizing we started a runtime service. So we actually make a dummy prescription. So we actually can take that out to the farm and sit down with the grower in his piece of equipment on his farm. No product needed. Go ahead. He can run it. He gets to see. And where that came in by doing that, we eliminated 95 to 90% of any issues. They can walk in the field, load a prescription, and go because they've actually loaded that prescription. The test prescription, they know their equipment's working. We've also caught where they said, "Oh, yeah, drill's ready to go." We get out there, they don't have an unlock. They were told they had it, so they had to get that. And so that's where the frustration comes. So we're trying to alleviate frustration, and it's all about making variable rate easy. You make it easy, everybody, all the new equipment comes with the monitor. So it's not like we're back to the old grain drill that's, grab the lever, undo the wing nut, and set it to your rate. Like it's all there. It's coming, it's fully loaded with every piece of equipment that's coming. That's brand new.
Mm-hmm. Caleb, right now, where do you see sort of the first place that this gets added? Is it on the fertilizer side, on like top up on corn, or where typically is the first place variable rate
Yeah,
gets added?
Well, obviously, it's going to depend on what equipment's available, right? So the easiest thing, like especially for a small farmer who maybe doesn't have new equipment, right? It's fairly easy if they have their if they get their fertilizer custom applied to just talk to their crop input retailer. Like for example, like we'll go and just use our equipment. Our equipment's going over their land anyways, so you might as well press a few buttons, and it's really easy just to go fully variable rate with fertilizer right from the get go, right? So we can soil map their farm, we generate those scripts, and then if we're custom applying, it's fairly easy. Now, if they've got their own equipment, then we just kind of start with what equipment they have, right? So if they've got ability to do variable rate seed through their planter or drill or whatever it is, then we can go with that. And then, but yeah, it just is a matter of where the equipment fits, and then and how that works in. Now, I think in terms of like dollars and cents, the total amount of dollars that's available, it's probably larger with the fertilizer side, just because those numbers are larger, and I think there's more opportunity to vary them to more extremes than there is for seeds, in my opinion. So I'd say that from a dollars per acre perspective, it'd probably be with the fertilizer.
So, and great comments coming in and some good questions as well. So Kevin brings up, so Canadian Cowman brings up, if you're following well in the comments, Caleb, small acreage fields and lots of custom planning here, zero variable anything, just population and FERT changes per field. So I guess that brings in is there a certain scale of field size that is sort of required to make this worth it? Or would you say you can find enough variation on a small enough scale to make it work?
Yeah, from my experience, like we've worked with farmers of all different sizes, right? So we have farmers 300 acre, chunks of land that we do, but then we have smaller like 50 acre fields that we're able to work with successfully. So I don't think that there really is too much of a size barrier there, because we can work with like, if we're the ones doing the custom application, speaking like kind of as a custom app business, it's no more extra work for us to punch a few buttons into the monitor than it is to just do a straight rate, right? So it's I'd say that the scale thing is fairly it's not too consequential. It's just a matter of which operations have what equipment, whether it's custom applied,
Mhm.
their own, and if they have already equipment that's not variable rate capable, right? So, but I think in general, I don't think that the scale really matters too much.
Okay, now Garth, you have sort of the opposite problem. Is that most fields are not too small, but you've got a lot of ground to cover, and of course, broadacre crops that, well, right now very valuable, but some years potentially pretty thin margins. Does that, do you think,
Yep.
work for or against VR?
Well, I guess it's twofold. I guess you start with the size that you just talked about. Our smallest field is 40 acres. Our
Mhm.
largest is just a little over 2,000 acres. And yeah, so it really depends on economies of scale to what they're looking at. Right now, it's very easy to justify variable rate to anyone because when we're talking in the West right now, we have bids of between $1,200 to $1,400 on urea, um, $1,200 to $1,600 on phosphate, 800 to 1,000 on potash. Those are some pretty big numbers. And so when you start doing that math very quickly, um, there has not been, a crop that sits down and say, oh, well, yeah, that does not make any sense. However, then you got to go into where does that change? And I know we're going to get into it on variable rate seeding, but yes, pulses don't. We got a huge Western Canada is huge into pulses, and they're not huge fertilizer users as far as nitrogen, as an example.
Right.
But that's where they're not cheap seed. It's not as bad as corn seed or soybean seed, but it's close at this time. So
Mhm.
it's one where we look at, and it's kind of one of those things we deal with of managing that seeding side of, you know, looking at how we can grow the business, and that goes for it. So
All right. So we've got some great comments coming in. And one of them, Dr. Harker, completely plays into the first clip I want to play. So that's where we're going to go. We're going to go on ground truthing, validating, those sorts of things. So we are going to go, before we answer Dr. Dave's questions, we're going to go to our clip. This is with Dale Cowan, and this is validating some of these maps, counting tassels. So validating the eventual plant population we got on a corn crop using technology. And we'll go from there. Jay, if you can run that clip.
You did some research on corn tassel counts and harvest populations. Tell us what you did and why you feel it's important to know our harvest populations.
Well, I think, with any precision ag technology, you always do a plan first, or hopefully you do, and then you implement the plan, and then you follow through. And I think one of the areas I feel personally that we're missing in is when you do a lot of variable rate seeding or just straight rate seeding is how many of us actually do a final population just prior to harvest. What are we actually harvesting compared to what we actually planted? And that number is not the same number. And quite often, it's quite variable through the field, and it's quite hard sometimes walking through a field to actually see that. So we decided to use some drone technology and see if we can't get a more detailed count of just the distribution of population. Never mind variable rate seeding, just what is the distribution in a normal fixed rate seeding application.
Now we have some images here, and I'm going to put them up on the screen detailing harvest populations in a field that you followed. They really tell an interesting story. What are we seeing here? This first one that really looks at counts across the field.
Well, this is a result of a drone image. So this is a 79-acre field, and normally when you walk a field, you might do a dozen population counts, maybe never get to the back of the farm. So this drone was programmed to fly the entire field and basically take an image on every acre, the center of every acre. And in doing so, we were able to capture at a high resolution, only 50 feet above ground level, so very detailed imagery. And then we subscribed to a service to interpret that image using a logarithm to count tassels. So what you're looking at there is the final result of a map, and those circles are where the image was taken, and that number in the circle is the plant stands in thousands of an acre, or the tassel counts rather in thousands of an acre. So it gives you a pretty good distribution across the whole field. It's just what the variability was in final population.
Yeah, and we also got a picture of close-ups of the tassels and how that imagery works. Dale, what do you see here?
Well, what you're subscribing to, what you're purchasing with a service provider, a high-end service provider, is use of their logarithm that's been set up with a object recognition software that says, this is what a corn tassel looks like. Here's the image. Now go find everything that looks like a corn tassel they trained you to find and add them up for me. And that's really what you're looking at is a logarithm interpreting an image and counting the number of tassels it finds in an image and then extrapolating out to plants per acre.
Yeah, another interesting picture here, a population comparison, and really quite a telling picture here, Dale. 20,000 versus 29,000. Stark differences here.
Well, yeah, so I dropped 34,000 seeds per acre. So I've got some spots in my field as low as 20. And it's quite obvious the gaps in the bare dirt that's showing, which means it's not growing corn. And the 28 or 29,000 plants, you can't see any ground and intercepting as much sunlight as possible. So right off the bat, you start to see, well, I got a major difference in my biomass, which means I should have a pretty good difference in my yield. So then the question becomes, why is that there? If I drop 34,000, why am I missing 14,000 plants per acre?
Yeah, and hey, final thing I want to look at here is you also have a yield map, and it really does line up with a population map. When you look at this from an agronomic perspective, what are you learning, and what questions should growers ask when they see this?
Well, yield is always a function of crop stress, right? So the fewer stresses a crop comes across, the more yield it should produce. And what you see in the map is a range in yields, and that lower left-hand corner. I know for a fact from having first-hand knowledge in the field, that's a drainage issue. And that's really where that low population image came from. So we had an environment there that we lost some plants due to some pretty heavy rainfall events and some resulting poor drainage. And then we got other areas where we have subtle changes in topography, soil texture, moisture holding capacity, drainage issues. And so you just start to see that natural field attributes start to play on that fixed population. And now I see that I can start relating yield to population and just verify that, just what am I getting for population? And then you also start to understand the characteristics of the hybrid. So when you grow a flex hybrid that has a low population, sometimes the yield at 22 or 23,000 plants per acre isn't much different than the yield at 28 or 29,000 plants per acre because it has the ability to compensate. So you start to see hybrid characteristics starting to come to light in the field.
Oh, goodness, during that clip, so many good questions came in. I'm excited. But before we get to them, of course, I do want to send another shout out to our show sponsors, to Decisive Farming by TELUS Agriculture, to the Pulse School, and to ADAMA Canada. While other sources of innovation run dry, ADAMA is here to deliver, leveraging the world's largest library of actives to provide innovative crop protection solutions to your greatest challenges. We're all in on you. Talk to your ADAMA sales rep today. Wow. Okay. So many good questions. So let's start with where I promised and building off of Dale Cowan's discussion where so some great visuals there, looked at counting tassels to verify plant populations, all these sorts of layers. Love it. So Caleb, I'll start with you. What's the process for validating prescriptions? So is that something that as a company you do? Do growers ask for that? And how do you handle that?
Yeah. So I think it's really easy for anybody to make a map, right? Like it's not a hard thing to draw a map of a field and to make a prescription. But what's hard is to make sure that that script is actually the optimum one, right? And so I'm actually working on a PhD right now to kind of test different management strategies to see what the best management opportunities are for a few different crop inputs across the field. And so I think that there has to be a lot of on-farm experiments to be able to validate some of those prescriptions to make sure that we do have optimal rates across the field. So, for example, like we've done quite a bit of work on fungicide applications, turning fungicide on and off on different soil types. So, for example, on well-drained soils like our Guelph loams that we have here around Guelph, those are going to be soils where we turn off the fungicide application because they're lower yielding. So there just isn't an economic return on those soils. If we go down to our wettest soils, the Park Hill loams, those are where we see some pretty significant responses to fungicide, upwards of 20 bushels to foliar fungicide in corn, just because we have wetter soils there, there's more disease pressure, and so we have a larger fungicide response. And so obviously that takes a lot of resources and intensity. So when you're talking with a precision ag provider, you want to make sure that they're interested in this kind of stuff. They're not just wanting to sell you more lab samples to go off to the lab. It has to be something that they've done a lot of research and experience into some of this stuff. It also has to make sense to you as a farmer as well, right? Because if you're getting a script back that doesn't really make a lot of sense, just make sure that you're asking questions, right? Does it follow along with what I know about the yield variability across the field? Does it follow along with topography and what I know of the soils as well?
It's a good point. Garth, do you get that at times where a farmer says, "Yep, this is bang on," or it's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what's this?" Where they point out like, "Hey, this doesn't make any sense to me."
I would say usually it's usually an area. For us, we have a lot of salinity in the West. So I'll have a lot of guys come out from the East going, "Why do you have snow in the middle of July?" And it's like, that's not snow, that's salt. So those are usually, we can delineate it. It's just more of how deep is that salt? What is the year bringing? That's why, we started off with single year NDVI as a company. And within the first year, we're like, this is actually garbage, to be honest, because it was like, what year do you choose? Do you choose your best year? Do you choose your worst year? Do you choose the average? And then that's where we actually got in. That's where we got our patent built was on multiple years. So we're putting 5 to 7 years together to make a very good composite map so we can delineate those areas very, very well so that the grower can have that trust in the map, because it is, like I said, I can throw that map out in front of them and yeah, they'll pick all those spots out. And yeah, we work together with that. And then once we have that map, then we go, that's the base to start, but soil testing is still the cornerstone within at least our industry out here. If you're not soil, I've had guys say, well, I don't need to soil test, I can use imagery. And imagery is very powerful, but the soil tells you the story. And, that's, yes, I'm a dirt nerd, so that I love soil, but that it all starts from the ground up. And if you don't have that benchmark, that starting point, you're shooting by the seat of your pants saying, I guess this is what it is, but we don't know. Without that information, what is a high producing area? Why is it showing up high production, or why is it low production? And we've looked at whether it's there's the different factors, whether you do zone sampling like we do, or you do grid like a lot of the East Country is. There's nothing wrong. They both all have their niche in the marketplace and how they work.
Oh, we're going to dig into those, Garth, but this does segue beautifully into Jason's question, which is a very good one. So thank you, Mr. Vote, out of Manitoba. So now, I mean, we can talk about everybody, but specifically when you're creating maps, what's that base for variable rate? So is it NDVI? Is it a yield map? Is it soil? So where do you start to delineate those zones? So Caleb, I'll start with you. Garth alluded to some of what you're doing at Decisive Farming, so we'll go back to that. But Caleb, do you start with the soil? Where do you begin?
Sure. Maybe we'll throw up that first slide that I had there. I think it's the number one there. But what we do is we create these digital soil maps, right? And so as inputs for these different layers, we use several different data sources, right? So we use some imagery, we use some topography, we'll use some, and then we'll also use some electromagnetic conductivity data. So we'll combine those together and help to use them to pick our sample points of where we're going to pull these soil cores from. So, for example, here, this what we're seeing here is an example of a Guelph loam soil profile. That's a well-drained soil. It tends to occur on the tops of hills. It's kind of loamy till, so it's a decent soil, but it's going to be dry. This is a soil that we're going to get, maybe 100 bushel corn from. If you go to the next slide here, it's just going down the hill just a little bit here. And basically what this is it's called a London loam. So this is an imperfectly drained soil. It's similar material as the Guelph loam, but it has just more water available. And so why we're going down this deep, some of you might be thinking or wondering, is because we're looking at those different colors in the soil profile. And so if you go to the next slide here, we'll see that there's a lot more gray colors down here. And this is our Park Hill loam. And so this is going to be our poorly drained soil type. So this soil is going to be, it's going to have some of that steel blue color because the iron in that soil is being reduced to that steel kind of color with some bright splotchy mottles, and so that's what those red spots are there. And so this is just showing us that the water table is really high in this soil type throughout the growing season. So we're going to have really high corn yields or soybean yields or wheat yields from this area because we have all kinds of water there. So we might get 250 bushel corn from soils grown on this soil type. So on this soil, we're going to be increasing our corn population up to close to 38,000 seeds per acre. But on the Guelph loam, we're going to be backing it off to maybe 28,000 seeds per acre to kind of manage the optimal seeding rates, right? Because we don't have the yield capacity on the Guelph loam as we do on this Park Hill loam here. So just to summarize that, we're taking several different layers of data. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, is this an actual field, and how big is it?
That's right. So this is an actual field just north of Guelph. It's 100 acres. And so from this 100-acre field here, we're taking we're taking about 25 cores per 100 acres. And we're taking them from discrete points. So we're not going and bulk sampling a zone. We're taking them from points that we can then use some software and some machine learning to figure out how that soil properties vary across the entire field. So that's just in a nutshell, right? We're taking these different layers of data. We're using them to figure out what's similar, what's different, assigning them a soil type name according to those old county soil reports that have all the information on how those soils are managed, and then we're developing that soil type map, and then later on a property map from the topsoil in the top 6 inches of this soil core.
So Lara DeMozak is watching right now, which, yes, Lara, and Garth, you've already said you're a total soil geek. So this is just lovely. We just love soil cores, I'll be honest. But also, yeah, exactly. But also, that's 100 acres, and I have tried to convey to my colleagues what soils are like in Ontario, and I liken it to finger painting of like streaks of different soil types through it. So that's why I asked the question about how big this field is, and the amount of variability within that 100 acres is pretty remarkable. So that is super cool. Now, okay, so now this is we've got our soil types and what we know about them and those sorts of things. Now, Garth, there's a question here with that NDVI. If we're talking about using NDVI as one of our layers to building these, Matthew is asking, do you do a composite of multiple weeks of NDVI over multiple years? So what goes in sort of like into your algorithm? Is it many years that goes into that NDVI?
Yeah, so it's basically the satellite. Our issue out here is cloud. Satellite goes over every 16 days. So we have, for the growing season, you basically have your peak biomass season is beginning of June to the end of July. So at that aspect is that, so you basically have 4 images every year you have the ability to grab. So that comes down and says, okay, how do we make that? So we have within our system, our algorithm that we've built, being able to choose those ones, and we can look at them. If it's a cloudy image, gets turfed. We also have that understanding. We're looking at more of the average. So when we take that, we are taking 5 to 7 years. It's not consecutive either, because you look at, as an example, I'll take southwestern Saskatchewan right now. The last 3 years have actually 4 years have been absolute drought. Year 5 before that was 33 inches of rain. Mm-hmm. So you get those extremes you have to throw out. They're not the average. And that's what we're looking for. We're actually looking for the average. So everybody says, well, how far do you go back? And it's like, well, I actually have imagery, which is the cool part, back to the early 80s. And do we use it? No. I loved looking at it because it gets to show that first generation before no-till or min-till was starting to where we're at today. The neat part is the good areas are still good and the poor areas are still poor. They're either larger or smaller. And so that's where we sit in that aspect of saying, okay, what are we looking at? So yeah, we're looking at using usually 1 to 2 images a year, and it's depending what that image quality is. It's still about a quality. This isn't just, I was told, and I had an image that I couldn't find. I wanted to bring on the show, but it was one of our competitors. They're no longer in business because it said, it's simple. We just throw it in a computer and it spits out a map. And the grower had our map, which was a 7-year, multi-year image beside that. And he says, this one looks like my 7-year-old drew it from the competitor. And there was no rhyme or reason. And then he looked at ours and he's like, yeah, that poor areas where Grandpa swore that the road crew stole his dirt. And it's still showing up that way. And those dark green bowls, that's where all the yield comes out. We look at, Caleb had that map, and that map to me, as soon as he put it up, makes sense. The best part of what Caleb showed you all was that soil. And that still, Lyndsey, comes back to your comment about, it's flat as a pancake. Well, I get that all the time. Well, the Regina Plains, it's as flat as my table, or it's the Red River Valley, it's flat as a table. There is variability. Is it high variability? No. And I know that Jason he can jump on that one on me because yes, he's in that area. He knows, but we know that area, that Red River Valley, there is still variability within that. So it's
Mhm.
how do you address it and what's causing that variability. And so
Mhm.
that's what we look at as a company, and we work with the grower to address that variability.
I I would love to hear the story of the farmer who claims that the road crew stole the topsoil, because I bet you it happened, and I would totally I would love to hear that. But I mean, you do see things like old fence lines, see things like old barnyards, you find, those sorts of things, but ultimately the base soil is the same decade over decade over decade, right? So what's really, I mean, obviously you can improve it, you can mine it, you can do all those things, but the base soil is going to be the same. So Caleb, we've got a couple other really cool maps, and so we've got our soil type base, you've got that sort of map. What else then do you build over top of that? So, someone mentioned yield and those sorts of things. So what else do we do once we've got that map?
Yeah, so we can also map out different soil properties, right? So we've got not only the soil type map, but also the soil properties. And so maybe we can throw up slide, I think it's slide 5 there.
I hit the wrong button. Just give us a
No worries.
sec. Unless we have intro music for clips now, Jay. Hey, there we go.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so this here, the purple underneath here represents our map of potassium, right? And so those white areas are going to be where the high levels are, and so where the low levels are. So in this field, in this valley here, we have about 80 ppm K, versus on the tops of those hills where that darkest purple is, that goes up to about 220 ppm. And so if we went and we bulk sampled this field, as kind of the traditional way, we put 20, 30 cores in a bucket, mixed them all up, sent them to the lab, we get a value of about 160, and we say, okay, we're doing pretty good across this whole field. But when you actually drill down to where that fertility is located in the field, there's some areas that are we're wasting money or we're not getting value by putting fertilizer there, and some areas where we're kind of shorting ourselves by not having enough fertilizer. So this year we've overlaid the bottom 20% of the yield points on top of this fertility map, and so there is some wildlife damage and tree shading near the edge, but generally what we see is that there's some low yields where we have our lowest yielding areas, is where we have our highest fertility levels. And if we go to the next slide here, there's also the inverse, right? So this valley here that I said was the Park Hill loam, that nice black topsoil that's nice and thick and deep. That's where you get 200 bushel corn, and so we're going to have really low fertility levels in that soil type, right? And so basically what's going on here is that we're applying a uniform rate for the past 50, 60, 70 years of fertilizer application across the field, but we're taking 250 bushel of corn from one soil type and only 100 from another. And so over year after year after year, we're doing variable rate removal, but we're not doing variable rate fertilizer application. And so we're looking at mapping that soil, that soil property variation, and then correcting that and trying to adapt for that to keep that variability to maximize basically our return on investment.
Caleb, you just blew my mind with variable rate removal. That just puts into words something that I've like struggled to say. Oh my gosh. Okay. Super cool. But also, this gets to, and I'll put this to both of you, when we talk about the sampling, so we can talk about NDVI mapping, and there's a few more follow-up questions there that we can talk about as well, because aerial imagery has its pros, cons, those sorts of things. Algorithms are continually learning, updating, those sorts of things. But when it comes to soil sampling, so Caleb, you've sort of alluded to it, grid versus benchmark. So Garth, I'll start with you. If you're working with a new client, let's say, I'm going to assume you use what soil samples they already have, but maybe not. Do you start all over again, and how do you sort of broach that?
Yeah, it's again, Caleb just talked about it. He threw 20 to 30 cores in a bucket. Now he's got a composite sample. So what I learned when I first started variable rate, that I actually knew nothing about soil testing when I'm doing just regular soil testing, because yes, you have all the data now. And so we do benchmark our zones. So we have we're doing a 12 to 14 core benchmark. So basically a 10-foot radius from that benchmark. year after year, we're coming back to those same spots. And why we did that? Because we did what I called random benchmark of what was mentioned earlier of doing the, in the video, he talked about doing the samples in all of the zones, like in that zone, but all through the field. We did that. And when I did 4 years and laid the maps out and the soil tests, the maps were good, but the soil tests, you'd think that you sampled a different field. And they were GPS. Everything we've done, we started GPS back in my retail days. So that's over 20 years ago, I was doing GPS referencing. But because you're doing that random benchmark, you don't get that clear cut line of data. And that's what benchmarking does. And that's always been the idea behind grid soil testing. They have that GPS location. They go back year out, not year after year, usually every 3 years. And that is kind of our difference on our side, is that we are going back on zone. We go back every year and we sample those whole fields. So it's about getting that data set to make a solid recommendation for a grower for the crop he's growing.
Okay, so Caleb, how do you approach, let's say, a new client that's got a 100-acre field or whatever? Because actually, that was one of the questions that Kevin had. If you've only got a 20-acre field, how many soil cores should you be pulling? And I'm going to guess it depends, but that's one of the questions. But so yeah, walk us through that, sort of how you get set up.
Yeah, so what we would do is we'd look at collecting a lot of data from the farm first, because we don't want to just go blindly into sampling a farm. We want to maximize the information that we can get from that farm for a certain cost, right? So we want to combine, so we want to look at gathering as much good imagery data as we can, right? Just like Garth has mentioned, there's a powerful image is a good tool to have, or several images preferably, right? So we want to look at gathering image. We want to look at gathering good yield data. We'll do this electrical conductivity scan across the field with one of our sensors that we have, and then we'll also look at topography, which we can get basically from the province of Ontario. We've got some really high quality data there, or from the sensor as well. So we'll look at all those different soil layers and then make our sample point selection based off of all that data, right? So rather than just kind of going blindly into the field, we want to first gather the data. And I think that's step number one, is to gather as much data as we can get our hands on.
So for someone, so if you were, Kevin's agronomist, he's in the Fraser Valley, they take 6 cuts of forage a year. I'm just putting it out there because I can't say it enough. Anyway, it just blows my mind. But how many soil samples would be needed to create a variable rate map for a 20-acre cornfield?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, the easy answer is it depends, right? But what I like to do is I like to say, okay, 0.25 times however many acres you have, right? So whatever that works out to be. I'm not going to be able to do math on the air here, but that's what it is. And so it'll probably be a little bit more rounded up for those. You're going to have a little bit of a higher density for smaller farms like that, just because we won't have as many cores or as many sample points there, but generally, that's kind of the rule of thumb that I like to do, is multiply 0.25 by the number of acres. And I mean, right, some fields it's going to be too much, some fields it's going to be too little. It all depends on the area and how much variability there is.
We are big fans of it depends on this show, Caleb. So it's totally fine. That's the magic on this show. So also one of the things I'm not going to, and Lara's going to make fun of me for the journey to clip 2, because we're not even going to get to clip 2, because by the time I play it, we're going to be out of time. But in clip 2, we talked about profitability mapping. And so anyone, if you want to head over to the post and check out the video, you can. But in that video, one of the key things, because you mentioned it, Caleb, on your map, the impact of trees potentially on field margins. So Garth, trees are these very tall plants that stay all the time. Anyway, sorry, I'm just kidding. Yeah, nice, right? Okay. But they have an impact, of course. They suck up a lot of moisture, whatever. So on that clip, we had a farmer who has actually essentially turned headlands into grass or perennial cover, so that they're not worried about compaction on the headlands as much, and also they're not really spending money on plants that don't really have any return along those tree lines. So all of this, of course, comes down to return on investment. And yield maps are great, but yields aren't profitability maps. So Garth, how do you take a precision map and make that sort of discussion of making the leap to the profitability side?
So the first one I'm going to start is we call them kochia plants. That's usually what
Oh,
our big
yes,
tall
that's what
plants.
they
Yeah.
are. Yes, and they're a
But up in
total.
the piece,
Yeah,
up in the piece, I got as many trees as there is in
there are trees.
Ontario.
There are
It's
trees. It's true.
but it's understanding that variability. And so what we do behind trees, we still plant them, but we understand that on that, the crop is on the north side of the trees, you're not going to get the same sunlight. So why are you treating it? So we know it comes now back to, I'm going to get two questions in here. The 20 acres corn, we have to remember a floater is between 60 to 70 feet wide. So we have to realize in that situation, it's no different than my end is dealing with 60, 70, 80, 90-foot drills. So how far am I going to go out from those trees? Yeah, whatever. It's usually 1 to 2 drill widths. Cut the rate of fertilizer back so that it's not growing a bunch of vegetation. So it's dealing with that avenue. And so one of the ways we deal with profitability maps is, yes, we still use yield data, but it's trying to get, we actually will take our zone map. So it's all digitized. And then we'll take the yield map and we'll actually put it to each of the zones. So we'll pull out the yield by each zone so that the grower can see what they actually did to what we put down with that zone. And we work with our growers for calibration. Now, we don't have, out of our growers, this was 5 years ago, we did this study, but out of 80 growers, there was less than 20 that we said we had good yield data from, that spent the time with.
Ouch.
They all had yield data, but
Not
there
good
was
data.
less than 20 that you would swear on that was good. And that is one of the things that comes back to profitability mapping is you need to use yield data so you can see what came off. But you also have to remember that is, yes, that's the actual yield, but did you get a rust infestation on your winter wheat or regular spring wheat that was late July, early August? That's not true. Yes, that's what it yielded, but that wasn't the true yield potential of that crop. So that's what you have to work. You have to show it to the grower, but it's that discussion. This isn't just, oh yeah, make a map, throw it across the table, say, here you go, this is what we made you. It's more of, what did that zone do and how do we manage it? Because we have growers that are in high salinity areas that we actually have sat down with to say, I'm losing money every year in those areas. How can I lose the least amount of money in those areas? And that's what we work with, of going through saying, okay, well, yeah, a lot of times all the fertilizer shut off. Seed is turned down. And some guys say, oh, we got to put more seed there, but it comes back to, that's what people like to do. And that is old philosophy, and there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you know your cost. As you put more seed, your costs go up. So if you're trying to maximize the return per acre, and that's where we're at, it's not field profitability, it's acre profitability. That's what we look at with our group. And I don't think Caleb's too different at the end of the day on what they do as well. So
I would guess, but you know what grows on saline spots there, Garth? Kochia.
Lots of great kochia.
So you just let it grow and then you mow it? I don't know. We've had many discussions here about what should you do with saline spots, but it's exactly true. That is not where you throw more money at that spot. It's not ever going to make you a profit. So turn everything off, put some plants there, away you go. Okay, so Caleb, a similar question. How do you bring this all to, and we are going to show a organic matter map. Actually, Jay, if you could bring up map 7, because I love it, and so we're going to talk about it anyway. But while Caleb is answering this question of the profitability equation, and then we're going to talk about this, because all of the soil geeks on this call, we can all just look at this and go tillage. But anyway, okay, so let's talk profitability, Caleb, first.
Yeah, so a profitability map is fairly straightforward to make, right? We're just basically going to multiply the yield map by our grain price, and then going to subtract off our inputs. And so I think Garth has done a great job here of kind of explaining what I agree with on kind of maximizing how we treat every acre, trying to maximize our return on investment for each one of our inputs on these different acres, right? So yeah, definitely on tops of hills, right? That's where we're going to back off our corn populations because we just don't have the potential there to get those high yields, and so we're going to save on some seed costs there. We don't need 38,000 seeds on top of a scraped off hill, right? We need 20, 28, 26,000 seeds on some of those rough looking hills. So I think but Garth has kind of hit that nail on the head in terms of how we manage those soils, I think.
Okay, so but then that gives us, it's a great example for this lovely field.
Yes.
Walk me through, what does a profitability map look like on a piece of ground like this?
Yeah, so here you can see again. So we've exaggerated some of this topography here in a GIS software called QGIS. It's just a free and open source software that we like to use, and so this I think is exaggerated around 7 times. So it's not there's not a crazy amount of topography, but there is some topography here, and so you can see that there definitely is. On the tops of hills is where we have our lower organic matter values, and then that soil and water are always going to flow down to the lowest point. And so we've talked a lot about flat fields, not really being flat because water is going to be moving. It's got to move somewhere, right? And so if there's a tiny, tiny little, bump in the landscape, that's where the water is going to go to. And so in this case, we have the organic matter on top of those hills moving down into the valleys where it's accumulating, it's getting trapped, right? And so here at this farm, I think, we have anywhere from 2.8% organic matter on the top of the hill down to 7% in the valleys. And so I guess people can see here that we did a bit of grid sampling here at this farm. And so we looked at a 10-acre block within this field, and we took 81 soil cores from that 10 acres. So we looked at basically a quarter of an acre grid samples. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to test what's the optimum density for grid sampling, how good is grid sampling to those different densities, and then is there a better way to maybe manage or to predict what our optimal soil variation is. And so if we maybe just go to the next slide here, there's just a chart with some numbers that kind of look at validating that. Because we can look at this and kind of say, okay, what's the what does it visually look like? But we have to look at some stats in order to figure out what those optimum values really are. So, for example, on this farm here, and we did this on 3 separate farms, but I'm just going to show this one farm here. And so we have different, these are basically R-squared numbers. And so what that is basically a higher number means we've predicted more of that variation with our predictor variable. So closer to 1 is you're explaining more of the variation. Closer to 0, it looks more like a shotgun blast. There's not much correlation between what we predicted and what we actually observed. And so what really surprised me is that when we look at that 2.5 acre grids here, there's basically no correlation whatsoever between what we predicted with that 2.5 acre grid to what we actually observed with that quarter of an acre samples within that grid. The 1 acre grid, was slightly better. We've got a little bit more variation predicted there, but still not excellent, right? Not enough that I would like to make a prescription on. And this is just basically comes down to the fact that soils are not formed in rectangles, right? They're not formed in squares. They're not formed in grids. So I don't think that we should be grid sampling then, right? Because if we have a grid that's over a hill and it covers some in the same square, has some on top of the hill, some in the valley, it's going to average those all together. And so that's why we basically see no correlation between what we predict and what we actually observed. And so we have our method here that we've developed with help of Doug Aspinall, our former Ontario soil specialist here in our province. And so this method here that we've developed has been really good. And so we've had a lot of good accuracy. And so I would just kind of point people more towards zone-based sampling than grid-based sampling because, grid soils are just not formed on grids. And that's kind of what I want the takeaway point to be, is just that we need to be looking more at zone-based sampling than grid, in my opinion.
Nature doesn't really make squares or rectangles. It is very true. It really doesn't. Okay, we are running out of time very quickly here. So one quick question. Now, Caleb, you did mention a GIS software, but Matthew would like to know. So Garth, I'll go to you as well. GIS software in general, or that you use, and NDVI maps. So this is, I think, part of this question is everybody sort of has to try and figure out for themselves what they're going to go with, what company, what mapping, whatever. So yeah, so Caleb, you mentioned some GIS software. Any insight there? Garth, maybe
Well,
we'll start with you.
we're heavily ArcGIS based.
Okay.
We've built our platform on Arc. You know, I've got growers that use Ag Leaders SMS to do that work. There's many companies for imagery. If you're getting into it, Landsat is probably still, everybody says, oh, well, it's old, it's this and that. You know what? It's a free source, and it's still good imagery. So it's one that you can utilize. It's for us, it works because, again, I talked about equipment size. But if I'm comparing to Ontario and an 8-row planter, it's not very good because it's 30. The pixels are 30 meter by 30 meters, or 90 feet by 90 feet. So that is, if you are on smaller equipment size, you have to go down. And we've done work with 0.6 meter, 0.3 meter. It's very great imagery, but for us, that's in one pass. The drill would have to have 10 sections that can vary in that drill, in that pass. So again, reality comes down to what you're using for equipment, and that's kind of comes back to, how many samples in that 20 acres? Well, tell me what you're using for equipment, and then we can start from there, because I don't believe pounding square pegs and round holes. And some of the things guys will take, I'm not here for the quick, here's the TFL spray that, everything slides off of. No, we're here for the long time. And sometimes it is. And I would tell a grower saying, here's what we got. And I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense on 20 acres to do variable rate. Even though you may want to, like I said, if you're a 70-foot floater, geez, there's not going to be a whole lot of variation on 20 acres. So why do you want to spend that cost and the added cost we have to charge you to do on the smaller side? So.
Mm-hmm. All right, Caleb, same question. You mentioned some JS software. What are you using?
Yep. So the one that we like to use most is QGIS. So very similar to ARC, but it's just open source. And then I guess SMS is just like Garth said. I think that's kind of a mainstay too. Reading equipment reading data from equipment, just validating scripts and that kind of stuff is important to do. And then in terms of getting scripts out to the field, we like to sometimes use My John Deere for that equipment. Or else we'll just kind of go for other older equipment. We'll go with a USB stick to transfer scripts around too. And then and then for the data, for the getting imagery, we'll take that imagery from whatever sources we can. Often, Google Earth is kind of a nice tool to have too. It's not super technical, but you can screenshot images. You can go back to historical images, which is easy for someone who is just kind of looking for something quick and simple. But we have Planet is basically, it's called a company called Planet Scope. That's what we like to use. Get lots of great imagery from there because they basically pump out an image a day from a bunch of different satellites. It used to be that it was pretty tricky to get an image of your field on the day that you wanted. Now, basically, every single day we've got an image from every single farm, which is pretty incredible. So we're lucky to have that now that we live in an age that we have those satellite constellations up there.
Yeah, even something, with Google Maps, they update it way more often than they used to. It's a little bit at times somewhat almost unnerving, honestly, how much you can look at and how much you can find and how much you can see. But to Garth's point, exactly, you have to make sure that the mapping or the imagery you're using is going to be useful for the level and for the scale. So it all depends on your end goal as well. Okay, we are out of time. I apologize for not getting to the second clip. I also apologize to the Pulse School in that I didn't do the promo for that, but it's pulseschool.com. Go check it out. It's really great. There's been like 13 years of it. And it's a real agriculture product. So, if you like pulses, go check it out. But thank you, of course, to Garth and to Caleb for joining me here tonight. This was a lot of fun, super informative. I really appreciate both of you coming out and answering all these questions. So thank you to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, all right. And of course, thank you to ADAMA Canada and to Decisive Farming by TELUS Agriculture for supporting this show. And to everyone who was in the comments asking great questions, we really do appreciate that you're here. It makes the show just absolutely fly by. And lots of really great stuff here. I'm sure we could do... Well, actually, yes, we are going to bug you again, and we're going to do more on this topic for sure. All right, and I will be back next week, 8 p.m. Eastern. It will be another Ontario Diagnostic Days episode. I'll have Albert Tenuta and Horst Bonner on the show next week, so join me then. All right, cheers, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.